Werner, he always had a tool bag, a cloth bag with tools. I took it, put it on the washing machine, took out the pliers and the hammer and so on, and I told Werner, now, if you really can move matter, do something, do it. Repair the washing machine. And I went to my office and continued working, writing.
Frau Skada, Sie sind als Dozentin tätig, haben lange Zeit erfolgreich eine Künstleragentur betrieben.
Ms. Skada, you work as a lecturer, have been running an artist agency for a long time, but also released an unusual book a few years ago entitled When the Soul Learns to Fly. In it you describe very remarkable after-death contacts with a best friend, Werner, with the aim, as you write, of taking away the fear of life and death. Please tell us briefly who Werner was to you and how his life came to an end.
Der Werner war, wie man so schön sagt, ein Seelenverwandter.
Werner was, as the saying goes, a soulmate. I met Werner when he was 19. I was 19 too. Then we were together for a while. We were married for 10 years, and then we broke up because our life paths diverged. But then we got back together, but in a different way, through a very deep friendship. We helped each other, and that's how it stayed, especially when his illness came along, his head injury. And so I accompanied Werner for 19 years at that time, also as a nurse in the legal sense. And then Werner lived at a nursing home for the last 13 years of his life. And I would say that there are soulmates. Werner was certainly one of my soulmates. And then he died of a pulmonary emphysema. He was bedridden for about 6 months, but he was very clear in the head. And we talked about the fact that there is a continuation after leaving the body.
Were you always interested in ideological questions, or was this interest due to the illness?
Always. It happened when we were in our mid-20s. We had an experience. We got to know an older gentleman in Starnberg in an ice cream parlor, who turned out to be a doctor of philosophy and psychology, whom I would like to call wise, and who told us, two young people, about Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and who recited Goethe and introduced us to this topic. And then, in those more than 40 years, when Werner and I accompanied each other, in whatever form, this was always a topic of interest. Werner was a singular mathematician and very open to Einstein, and always said, Gabi, you can't kill energy. We consist of energy, and it will continue to exist. How right he was, I have to say.
So you had already talked to him about a possible life after death while he was still alive and well. Did you also talk to him about the possibility of staying in contact after his death?
The possibility of staying in contact came up only in the last few months. Werner lay in his nursing bed, as I've already said, very relaxed. I had a great admiration for him. He knew he would have to leave soon. And then we discussed the topic openly. I remember that in the last 5 or 6 days before he flew away, I asked him if what we have discussed about our life is true, then he may show himself. Then he may give me a sign so that we can substantiate it. Because man is skeptical. Even if we are more or less convinced of things, nevertheless, in the end, proof is missing. Then I also asked him in the last few days, I also recorded it with a mobile phone, if I may write a book about his life and his story. And he agreed. At that time, I had completely different plans with the book, because I wanted to write down the story of his illness, with all the stumbling stones, also with the authorities, doctors, clinics, nursing homes. And then everything turned out quite differently. I was there one day before, in this home where he lived, a very nice nursing home near Traunstein. I was there one afternoon before. There were also a few nursing home residents with me. He was completely clear, relaxed, free of any wrinkles. And I stayed there for a long time that evening. And when I left, I thought, I had a premonition, and I thought, as I sat in the car, this could have been the last time I saw him. And that's how it was. The next day, it was a Friday, the care staff asked if he wanted to have lunch, and he said no thank you. And he left, completely relaxed.
How did the contact with Werner develop after his death? Did you also have, as many relatives describe, the impression of a presence? Or did you experience remarkable coincidences, of which there are often reports?
Yes, well, there are no coincidences. I remember very well, it was a Friday. I drove to Traunstein and said goodbye to Werner, so to speak. And then on the weekend, I worked here in my study, and then it was Sunday. And he was back again. It turned out like this. I had a dog that Werner liked very much, and the dog also liked Werner, and Leo, the dog, went outside to the terrace, wagging his tail, completely excited and howling. And I look outside, and I see there's nothing there. And then I think, Jesus, Werner is sitting there. And I say, you're already back again. But as we humans are wired, I thought to myself, well, maybe I'm mistaken.
So that was the impression you had?
Exactly, but that then became more solidified. As I said, I work and write a lot in my study. And a few days later in the evening, I like to work in the evening when I'm writing, I was sitting quietly in my office at my computer, and the dog was there with me. And then I hear a noise, and I think, strange, and go into the living room. And I see, well, I have to add, on that evening, I had to say goodbye to Werner when I was in the nursing home, and the nursing staff said, take what you can take with you. And instinctively, you reach for things without thinking. And I took with me his glasses to look through. As it turned out later, his cell phone for communication, his dice cup, which he loved so much with the dice in it, and his watch, for the right time.
Für die richtige Zeit.
And then, a few days later, I work in my office and I hear this noise from the living room. And I go over there and I see on this chair where I'd put the things, the dice cup had fallen over. And I think, strange. And I look at the floor and I count the eyes of the dice, and it's 33. And if you know a little about numerology, then you know 33 is a master number. And I think, strange. And then I took the cup, I collected the dice, rolled the dice, and again 33. And I said, Werner, I understand.
Numerology was a subject that also interested him.
Yes, and then I try to keep working. And I think, aha, he keeps coming back. But it was also known to me when my mother died, who was also a very spiritual person, that after her death, which occurred very suddenly, she was here again for almost 2 years. And I could smell her. Do you understand what I mean? Especially mothers and children have a relationship. And that I could feel her directly and smell her because we still had a lot to tell each other. So it wasn't totally strange to me. Only this time it was really plastic. That is, the few days before Werner flew away. I don't even want to say die. I avoid this word. He flew away, left his body, and we had the conversation. And I said, well, then move something. Throw a candle around or something. How childish we are. And then the thing with the dice cube happened. And afterwards, I thought about it, and of course, you are in doubt. You know what I mean? Did I imagine all this? Or can he really move matter? And then it was maybe a week later. It all happened within 10 to 14 days. Then something happened. I know it sounds so absurd, but I'll tell you anyway. There's a washing machine in the kitchen, and it wasn't quite new at the time. In any case, this washing machine didn't pump out the water, and in the evening, when I work, I have to walk past the washing machine. So it went on for days, and I was, what can I say, the laundry in there, the water isn't being pumped out, and I was angry. I think, if only Werner were here, he could repair something like that. And then I pumped the water out again and again. You know, there's a drain down there, and then you have to pump the water out. It's all tedious. And then you turn the machine back on, and it doesn't pump it out. And then I'm at, I don't know, my 5th try. Werner, he always had a tool bag, a cloth bag with tools. I took it, put it on the washing machine, took out the pliers and the hammer and so on, and I told Werner, now, if you really can move matter, do something. Do it. Repair the washing machine. And I went to my office and continued working, writing. 3 hours later, I go into the kitchen. It was in the evening. I go into the kitchen and I think, let's see. And I turned on the washing machine. You know, just rinsing and spinning. And I stand in front of it, and the water is being pumped out. I couldn't believe it. And I look at the kitchen table at the place where Werner was, and you know, you get these visions just for a couple of seconds, and I see him sitting there with a triumphant face. And I say, Werner, that's brilliant. That's just brilliant. but it can also be a coincidence. In any case, the washing machine worked again, and that haunted me for a few days. A few days later, the washing machine still worked, and I thought, that can't be, it can't be.
A lasting repair.
Werner had decided beforehand to be cremated, and I prepared with his sister, with his older sister, prepared for the funeral. The family had a family grave at the Forest Cemetery in Munich. And it took a long time, and I said, "Do you already know when the funeral will be?" And then she called and said, "It's on the 5th of May. And I dropped the receiver. "That's my birthday." And I said, "Oh, Ingrid, can you try to change that?" "Yes, she'll try." And it didn't work. And I have to say, in all these many years, in 42 years, Werner never forgot my birthday. No matter where he was abroad a lot, no matter how sick he was, he never forgot my birthday. And of all days, his funeral falls on my birthday. And then I thought, Jesus, another sign. Are these the many little signs that we need? You know, you talk about such things for over 40 years, and then it actually happens, and then you sit there and still don't believe it. I mean, how crazy is man really?
So you looked for more evidence?
Yes, of course. That's how people are wired. I'm actually very down to earth. But I thought the incidents are accumulating. And then it occurred to me, I had a colleague, professionally, and she told me about how she'd accompanied her mother. And then after her mother's death, she'd gone to a medium to be able to talk to her mother again. Aha, I said, interesting. And then she told me her name and that she lived near here in Munich. And I wrote it down and put the note somewhere in a desk drawer. In any case, I remembered the story, but I didn't want to reveal it to my colleague. I thought, you know, this is all completely surreal and I'm crazy. And then a few days later, I found the note, Vera Luchsinger, with a phone number, and I thought, I'm going to call her now. And then I called her, and she was very nice on the phone. And then she asked in what relationship I was with the deceased. And then I briefly explained that we had been accompanying each other for a very long time. She asked when he had passed away. I said on April 9th. So the lady, this medium, I have to say I had never been to a medium before. I asked her, do you need any information? No. She didn't want to know anything. Just his first name and when he had left. And then I went there on a sunny July 1st, 2015. Out of excitement, I didn't find it at first. Then I was finally there. A tall blonde woman opened the door for me. She was very nice and pleasant. And then she led me into a light-filled room with a small seating area and explained to me how the procedure was going to be, because I told her I had never been to a medium before. Then she said, we are going to relax a bit. I already knew that. I have to say, I have been doing mental trainings since the early 90s by an American method called Silver Mind Control. I actually used that for my professional activities, which were sometimes very exhausting. Anyway, I knew how to relax in 5 or 6 minutes. And then she said she had a spiritual helper, Talim, for 15 years now. And this helper helps her to filter out the person she wants to talk to. I was not unaware of that because I know, I think it was Goethe who said it, the spirits that I cited my command ignore. So when you call the spirits, a lot of them can come at once, which is why there is someone like Talim on the other side. And she filters out so that we can talk to the right Werner. And then she said she would record the conversation with her phone. And I would be getting a CD. Oh, I said. And I thought, aha, she's brave or convinced of what she does. That she would give me a document, a speech document. Anyway, that's how it happened. And Vera looked inside herself, and I was also relatively relaxed. And then she spoke to Talim. And Talim said, "Oh yes, good that we are here, because Werner is behind her and is already quite excited because he has a lot to say." And yes, I have to say, I was given the instruction to prepare a few questions, but I didn't give them to Vera beforehand. So in the ongoing meeting, I asked my questions that in part only Werner could answer.
For example?
For example, whether he was the one who repaired the washing machine. That was an event she couldn't have known about. And he said, "Yes, dear Gabi, but you won't believe how difficult it is to move matter when you don't have hands anymore." And Vera laughs during this, and I think, Jesus, yes. Well, of course. And that's how we also spoke in life, you know? In any case, after the 1-hour meeting, she burned the CD for me. I got into my car. I drove home like in a trance. And I didn't dare to listen to the CD. And I thought, my God, this is completely surreal. And then I listened to the CD in the evening and was completely shocked, to be honest. And I cried a lot. And then I think, my God. And still, I'm incredulous. I called a good friend of mine. I have to say he's a doctor and a psychotherapist. And he knew Werner because he also took care of him when this accident happened. Ludwig is his name. He is very open about such things. In any case, I called him briefly, explained it to him, and said, "Come to me." And then I played him the CD. He listened to the conversation and said, "This is totally authentic." Yes, I say, this is actually madness.
So the way Werner was, the way he spoke, was very clear.
Yes, very clear. And then I was shocked. So I think, okay, well, I have to. You know, when you say things like that, I'm sure other people have said things like that in the last few days and said, "I'll write a book about you," and so on. And then the event occurs that he flies away and you're not able to do it. And you say, well, at some point I'll write the book. And then I think, okay, I'll start. Then I started to write a book, but more focused on the fatal head injury at the time. Werner fell down the stairs. The wrong treatment, no one did a CT. Werner had 2 hemorrhages in the front of his head. The hospital staff said he would change. I didn't even know what a personality change was. That turned out to be the case. I had finished the first 20 or 30 pages, as I had imagined them to be. And again, I'm sitting in the evening in the study, in front of the computer, and I hear a bang from the kitchen. And I go into the kitchen, turn on the light, and my little blackboard is lying on the floor. You know, in the past we had these pencil cases. It's been on my kitchen shelf for 30 years, and now it's lying on the floor. And I think, oh God, a board, the pens, right. And I think, and now? What happens now? And I take the board and put it on the kitchen table, and I think, what happens now? Does some invisible person write a message now? Of course not. Anyway, a few days later, I called Vera, the medium, again. I asked her, how is it with other people? Her clients. Do they come more often? No. They come once, talk to the deceased relative or friend, and then it's all good. Then I say, this is different. I would like to book another session. And she says, what's happened? I say, I don't want to talk about it now. Anyway, I go back to her, and we go through the same procedure. And Werner was very excited again and was waiting, says this spiritual being Talim. And then, because I asked him about the board, he said, of course, Gabi, it has to do with the book. You have already started, but this is not the book I thought of. And also at this session, there was again an audio protocol. And I asked my questions, and I went back home again, totally perplexed. And then the next evening, I listened to it in peace, and thought, yes, he's right. It should not be a book of suffering, but a book, and that was a very clear statement that you can also read about in the book. It should be a book that conveys courage and hope, not a book of suffering. Because he had described to us, or described to me in this ongoing session, what possibilities he now has in this other world. How everything is parallel, not linear, but parallel. And you know, Gabi, actually the book is already written. And again I sat and was baffled and thought, my God, this is taking on a life of its own. Yes. We then agreed in the second session that I may have to speak to Werner more often when we work on the book. He also explicitly said through the medium that he would like to be named co-author. And also the spiritual being Talim said through this medium that the spiritual world is with us on the project in order to bring the people, the completely normal people, closer to this topic. That it is not over when we leave the earthly body, but that we take our abilities, our dispositions, our knowledge with us into this other dimension, and thus also can help those who are still here.
Was that the core message?
Absolutely. We cannot take anything with us that is made of matter. It's completely uninteresting, you know? But that has been clear to me for a long time. We cannot take our houses with us, our money, our possessions. All that is totally irrelevant. But we can take our spiritual potential with us. And that is very important to know. What we learn here, he also said this in another session, the Earth is a learning planet. And that was already clear to me. And that became very clear, even if this learning process can be very tedious. You know, we always get opportunities, and it's sometimes tedious to make use of them. That's how I see it, because you have to make an effort. And maybe you also have to overcome yourself, to take on new tasks and to carry them out. But this potential is a wealth that is not taken from us, that we take with us into another dimension.
So you experienced it in such a way that the whole writing process was guided by the spiritual world.
Exactly. Because then it took on a life of its own. I can't say otherwise. Then things happened again and again. Werner made himself noticeable, made himself visible. And he also announced in the second or third session that he would write with me in the evening, that he would give me inspiration. I have a good intuition, so I can also receive such things. The process was over 2 years, and it turned into 9 sessions in total. And more things came to light. We wrote, I say we on purpose. I didn't write the book alone. Werner was with me. And these session protocols, which were all recorded, I transcribed them all in this book. I didn't take anything away. I didn't add anything. I just left it as it was. And as a result, in the 3rd or 4th session, the conversations became more and more intense. Also with messages, with views, or how the spiritual world sees some things. I can only say that I experienced that Werner gave me ideas or exact wording, whether you believe it or not. That's how it is. That's what happens. It comes through. But it's also exhausting at the same time, because you're receiving messages, non-verbal messages, that have to
be translated into language.
Exactly. And sometimes I couldn't type on my computer as fast as these messages flowed into my mind. Unbelievable.
During this writing process, you found many confirmations for topics that interested you and Werner. But were there also surprises in the message for you? Or circumstances that you had imagined quite differently before?
Yes. A childlike question that I asked through the medium was how things work in the spiritual world and what they do there. And Werner said, "You won't believe it. We are very busy here. We help other deceased people who come to us. We help the children's souls who come to us. And we give people, like in this case they gave me, impulses again and again. You just have to learn to receive them." And that's how I receive these messages, these thoughts and solutions. I contact them, and this still happens, that in some things, even professional things, I bring myself into a relaxed situation. This usually happens in the evening. Everyday life can be very overwhelming. and I ask specific questions, even without the medium. I say, Werner, I have this and that problem to solve. Give me a hint. And this doesn't have to happen right away, but it can happen the next day or the day after that. That I suddenly get this brilliant idea how to solve the problem. And that doesn't just come from me, you see. It comes from somewhere else, because obviously they have a much better overview in the spiritual world.
Your book also includes an audio CD. What did you choose for it?
The first session. I talked to some readers who told me it took them weeks to listen to the CD, to overcome their fear. Because for many people, this is still a taboo topic, a fear topic, which I don't understand at all. Look, if you have a partner or a spouse or a mother, a father, or a close friend who has gone to the other side, why should it be a problem to talk to them again? I've talked to them before. And this is obviously something that has to be overcome for some people. But as I said in the first session, which was relatively harmless compared to the other 8 sessions, the first session was like small talk.
It is still acceptable.
Exactly. During the next sessions, my goal, and also the goal of the spiritual world, in a way that it really became more and more intense, was talking about problems that concern us all.
In your book you write, you want to encourage people to live, change their perspective. In short, you want to help people lose their fear of death. Is that right?
Absolutely right. I want to, or rather we want to make it clear to people that their spiritual potential, their spiritual credit, or whatever you want to call it, is taken with them. That means it's not over when we leave the earthly body, but a completely new and free way of life begins. A way of life, if I may call it that, a way of life that begins in another dimension. But we only take with us what we have created here on earth, you know? If a person has lived 80 years carefree and tried to gather a lot of material things around them, then they will not be enlightened in the spiritual world, you know? Then we may need 1 or 2 more lives. That has also become clear. We live several lives, and not just one, because what we have to learn, we can't learn in an 80-year-old life.
Now you have already segued me to my last question. Do you believe that you will see Werner again in another world? Or maybe in another earthly life?
I'm absolutely sure. Absolutely sure. It has also become clear that Werner and I are soulmates, but that there are even more people who are also our soulmates. Because it also happens to us in life that we get to know someone and have the feeling for a moment, for a 1/10 of a second, that we already know them. He or she is so familiar to me. And that happens to a lot of people. So we will certainly meet again in another life. And maybe accompany each other again in whatever form, in order to learn again. But as I have already said, If you're not ready to learn here, you can't expect that the moment you leave your body and enter the spiritual world, the great enlightenment will happen. You take with you the potential you have developed here.
Material values are not the highest goal in life from this point of view.
I have suspected this for a long time, but now I know that this is completely unimportant. Of course, it is nice to live in a nice apartment or house, but it is unimportant how many millions you have on your bank account. You can't take it with you. Only your spiritual potential. And this in turn, this knowledge, makes it so easy to leave our body at some point. According to our time calculation, this is a wonderful prospect to be here on this planet for 75 or 80 years. To learn, to be curious, to absorb new spiritual things into ourselves. And then, at some point, to leave our body in peace with ourselves and everything else, and to act in a different form in the spiritual world.
Ms. Khader, thank you for the insights into your experiences, for your openness. Good luck with your book, and thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you.